A hardcore gamer who know how big of a deal it is to have Dark Souls 3 completed, or even to have tried playing the game. If someone had completed Dark Souls 3, you know they're not just to be messed with. The game was so popular it became the medium to judge the gaming skill of another gamer, to decide if he's a hardcore or not. Dark Souls was a great deal in the last decade, but most of you probably don't know how this extremely successful game series started. Dark Souls 3 is the last entry of the Souls series, and it all started almost 11 years ago with the creation of the Demon Souls, the father of the Souls series. Demon Souls is an action role-playing game that was released back in 2009. The game was developed by From Software and was released on PlayStation 3 exclusively. The game was a great success at the time and it debuted at the second place on the chart with over 39,000 units sold in the first week, and also selling 95% of the shipped copies in its debut. The game ultimately sold over 1 million copies worldwide by 2011. The other side of this success is completely a different story. The game was first announced in October 2008 and a playable demo was also available the following week at the Tokyo Game Show. This wasn't actually a good thing for the game because most people who tried playing it didn't quite like it. Well, to put it right, they didn't like it at first. People started thinking the game was poorly constructed and thought that the mechanics were still under work. This genre game type and the mechanics were all new and hard for the people back then to be assumed. Even people from the dev team said it was badly designed and the game was challenging because of that. This caused the sales to go slow at first, and the publishers thought the game was going to be a failure. However, people who had played the game and understood the developer's approach to the game and genre, good word was spread about the game and boosted the sales. Honestly, the game's fantastic, but it still had a potential to be even better. The story most people don't know about the Demon Souls is that the developers had to face problems and drama in the development stages. The long version in short is that the Demon Souls was the first of its kind and the developers had never done something like that before. So there was a lot to decide and design along with a lot of the inside disagreements and a timer on their back. The game wasn't even playable until the very late development stages, and another notable challenge was that the translation of the game from original Japanese version to in English. The translation was done by Active Gaming Media, led by James Mountain, and even though he did a good job to do the translation justice, even without having an access to images or videos of the video game, the grammatical errors were criticized commonly. Though the game was published by Sony Computer Entertainment Japan in Japan, the other international versions were done by Atlus USA in North America and by Namco Games in most of Asia, Africa, Europe, South America and Oceania regions. Talking about the game itself, the game is an action role-playing game that wasn't heavily focused on the story, but the mechanics and the gameplay. The game was evenly balanced with a great melee and ranged combat mechanics, and the most interesting about this is the difficulty. Demon's Souls didn't have the option to choose the difficulty level of choice. Instead, the game started with the simpler fights and then turns into absolute nightmare with the game's progression. Though the game isn't heavily focused on the story, there are still RPG elements like character customizations, statistics and stuff. And the stats can be later adjusted to match the player's weapon of choice as they progress. And one of the main aspects of the game is its setting. The game has to match the name, right? So they introduced the cursed land of Boletaria. The world is as spooky as it sounds. The perfect setting for the game is achieved by a dark backstory for Boletaria. It was attacked by the Old One due to the abuse of the soul art magic. The world was almost killed by magical, deep fog consisting deadly monsters by the Old One was suited into a deep sleep, and that was left of the almost dead world was populated with the special humans called monumentals. So the story for the game is made up when the present king of the world, King Alent, restores the soul arts and causes the Old One to rise again. That's how the game is set to the dark environment filled with monsters and demons. The game's world has 6 areas, where each end in good old boss fight. The whole story is basically about how the player gets to King Alent and kill him, or the Maiden in Black, who is a friendly demon you meet in the game. The player becomes dubbed as the Slayer of Demons, along the way and to the endgame. He can choose to kill King Alent to put the Old One back to slumber, becoming the hero, or choose to kill the friendly demon, Maiden in Black, and become a servant of the Old One and let the world die. So this is pretty much for the story of the game. But why is it so popular and successful then? Like I mentioned earlier, the game brings a whole new gaming experience than just a playable fantasy story. The whole combat mechanics are given a new perspective from the traditional game mechanics, as it's reliant on the timing, dodging, blocking and combining different weapons and stats. The game isn't player friendly, but the player has to adapt to the game's flow, literally. The stamina bar is another great feature introducing to add a whole new level of difficulty to the game. Managing the stamina bar and using it effectively was another huge part in the combat mechanics. Killing enemies grants you souls, experience points to upgrade your stats or even weaponry, and ore for the upgrading weapons. The most stressing and the difficult part comes next, the respawning. As I said, the developers had to decide a lot for the game, and the iconic decision is how the player would respawn if you die. In a level, if you manage to kill an enemies and get to the boss and then get killed by it, which you probably will, the player is respawned back at the start of that level, with all the minor enemies respawned and all your collected souls and XP being lost. However, if you manage to get to your last bloodstain in the next try, you'll receive the lost souls and XP back. But if you die before that, then I'm quite sorry, it's lost forever. This gameplay might be already similar for you, but considering the fact that the game came out back in 2009, games like Assassin's Creed 2, the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 came out in the very same year. Those might not have been in the same genre, but no other game had gameplay mechanics like the Demon's Souls back then. It took around 7 years after the Demon's Souls until Ubisoft decided to add RPG elements and mechanics like the Demon's Souls into their series. So to consider the birth of the date of the game, it's similar game's availability at the time. Demon's Souls was way ahead of its time, to be honest. From one boss fight to another, the game had diversity and excitement throughout the whole game. Later, it opened up the door to its successors, the Dark Souls series. Not only its difficult and challenging single-player aspect, but also its multiplayer mechanics were also really favoring the success of the game. The use of the asynchronous multiplayer mechanics was just genius. Demon's Souls fused multiplayer elements to the single-player mode, allowing players who were connected to the PlayStation Network share their gameplay experience in an innovational way. A player could see bloodstain and a ghostly image of how the other player can be activated to see how he died when facing enemies or even hidden passages and switches. Players can even leave pre-written text to warn or educate others with tactics and such. There are also two other multiplayer modes, co-op and a competitive. Cooperative mode is where you team up with two other players and fight against a boss, and competitive is where you invade another world as a Black Phantom and try to kill the host player. If you do, you'll be returned to your body in your own game, or if you fail, you lose your souls, giving the other players a portion. It's been almost 11 years and you can still play the game, but all these cool multiplayer features are no longer available. Alas, I decided to shut down the service in 2011, but decided to run it indefinitely. The server was ultimately shut down in 2018, but fans have private service if you want to check it out. So you now clearly have an idea why Demon's Souls is this good. But why it really should be remade, or probably remastered? The game was directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki and was co-produced with Takeshi Kaji. The project's concept was to revive the lost breed of the action games, and it surely did. They were both fans of the dark fantasy and did an amazing job not only to create a great game, but also reviving the whole genre and giving birth to the world-famous Souls series. The game was well received by media at the time as well, though the game was difficult and was a whole concept at the time. Reviewers found it a good thing. The game received 9 out of 10 ratings from the famous game reviewers like IGN, GameSpot, GamesRadar, VideoGamer.com. This must have been something, right? I can't stress enough the fact that Demon's Souls was a unique, legendary, one-of-a-kind masterpiece that gave new meaning to the gaming when gaming was becoming too easy. The game teaches the player patience and timing, giving the ultimate gaming experience. In kind of a way, the game is basically teaching the player to learn from the mistakes, and then coming to the graphics. The looks were really good at the time. The design team had a perfectly delivered the dark fantasy look, and GamesRadar called it a graphically stunning. If you compare the game with a present day game, you'll find it horrible looking, and you might not even want to play it, but it was from 2009. Imagine how the game would look if it was made in the present. Also, the sound was almost well designed and composed with the music from the actual instruments that made it extra special. After the game's North America release, the famous entertainment company Screw Attack, with a Rooster Teeth production, named the game as the 8th best PlayStation 3 exclusive to date. It didn't stop from being just a game, but went on to award with the GameSpot's overall Game of the Year, Best PlayStation 3 Game, Best Role-Playing Game, and the Best Original Game Mechanic for the online integration. It also went on to win the game's trailers Best RPG and Best New Intellectual Property, IGN's Best RPG for the PlayStation 3, X-Play Best Gameplay Innovation for its multiplayer mechanics, PC World's Game of the Year, and finally RPG Gamers of the RPG of the Year 2009, including the best graphics and the best PlayStation 3 RPG. We've seen how Dark Souls 3 became a huge hit for its difficulty. Even the Game of the Year 2019, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, was a hardcore game, and people fell in love with it. So it's obvious that Demon's Souls also has the market and the fans needed to make a remake successful. We've seen how Capcom remade Resident Evil 2 and became to be more successful than the original game. So why not do it with the dark fantasy action role-playing games, fodder as the Demon's Souls? So the good news is, like I mentioned in one of my previous videos, Demon's Souls Remaster or Remake might just be basically confirmed. Bluepoint Games is one of the best remastering studios out there, and they have done a great remasters like the ones from the Metal Gear Solid HD collections and more. Back in October 2019, they said that they were working on a big one, and fans started assuming that Demon's Souls Remake might be the one. The even bigger news is that if it was to be remade. Fans were expecting for the PlayStation 4, but now Bluepoint hyping up for the PlayStation 5, and the remake might just be the massive and stunning. The bad news is that there's still no official confirmation that Demon's Souls is the game that they're working on, so don't get your hopes high.